Good afternoon. This is my fourth lecture about the work of Dr. Carl Jung, and I've been wanting to make this as informal as possible. And so, therefore, I'm wearing a t shirt and trying to be personable to my audience. Today, I'm going to talk just a few minutes about alchemy. Uh, Dr. Jung wrote quite a lot on alchemy and spent about 30 years of his life focusing on that area. And that may be very confusing to the average layman because all we know normally from high school or whatever is that alchemy is something about the beginnings of chemistry, and it was about trying to create gold out of various elements. But Dr. Jung discovered that alchemy was also about fundamental psychology. And what the alchemists were doing was really studying the things that he was interested in psychology, but they had to do it in a sort of secret way, which was through symbols and secret ways of talking, because in those days the religious leaders would burn them at the stake if they didn't like what they heard. And so they had to be very careful, and they did this study over a period of about 1700 years, believe it or not. And then it fell into disuse, and people went on to the sciences. But Dr. Jung discovered that what they had learned and things that they were talking about were very important. What I think is important about what Dr. Jung ultimately explained in very simple words is that he was talking about the device the alchemists used, the vase, um, in which ingredients were put in and a result would come out. And this happens psychologically, not only in ourselves, but in every organization that we're a part of. So it happens in a marriage, it happens between mother and father and children. It also happens in sporting organizations where a team is a vase and the team working together creates a result, whether that's a championship team or a last place team. Uh, that alchemical transformation of the team is reflected by the results of the team. The same is true of nation states. And so, in the case of the United States in particular, we see that we've had many ingredients put into the American vase over the last 400 years from every nation in the world, from every religion in the world, from every race in the world, and from every attitude about how we live in the world. And so the result of that is the America that we see today. Whether we're proud of it or not, sometimes when we look at the events of an election year like this one, we think maybe we are not so proud about certain aspects. And that's another part of Dr. Jung's thinking, which was the shadow, because we have everybody has an idea about which side is right in the election campaign, and the other side is the shadow, the bad side. At least that's how many of us think. And it's basically a kind of colossal sumo wrestling match that every 4 years results in a new president. But in the case of the American vase, all of these debates and discussions over hundreds of years result in an American psyche, a uniquely American psyche. And so I don't think like my European cousins do. Um, and none of us think like a Muslim from Saudi Arabia thinks. but we have many things in common, as Dr. Jung proved over his lifetime. Now, he wrote 3 books that are in his collected works on alchemy. One is called Psychology and Alchemy. The last book that he wrote was Mysterium Conjunctionis, which is almost exclusively about alchemy. And he wrote another volume in his collected works called Alchemical Studies. And fundamentally, they come down to this. When you put ingredients into a pot and turn up the heat, you're going to boil them around and get a result out of that. And so that's basically all Dr. Jung was driving at in the study of alchemy. Now, it gets much more complicated than that, of course, because he's talking about many details in the human psyche and in the psyches of organizations. But that's fundamentally what he was talking about. There's nothing mystical about that. Many people have accused Dr. Jung of being a mystic, and he simply is not a mystic. He was a scientist. Everything he talked about during his lifetime was based on empirical research that he himself had experienced, either in his own life or in the lives of his patients. And so there is nothing woo-wee-woo about Dr. Jung. And just one example, I wanted to show one alchemical picture from the 16th century. It was done in 1582. And in this picture, you see 3 dragons in this vase here. And around it is civilization, people doing various forms of commerce. They've built buildings and so on. And the idea of this image, the most fundamental idea of this image, is that the 3 dragons represent our instincts. And in order to have civilization, we need to control our instincts. And so the 3 dragons have been put into the vase, and they're under control, and we're living in civilization. But still, we need, one of Dr. Jung's other teachings is that we need our instinctual selves also. He said that too much civilization causes sick animals, and too much instinct is bad for civilization. And so there needs to be a balance. And that's another of his fundamental concepts, which is there are dualities throughout life, and we need to balance these dualities. But that's fundamentally what alchemy is about in the context of Dr. Jung's work, and I urge you to learn something about it. Thanks for listening.